Mine's jammed again. If they send another metrics officer, I'll gut the console before they dock. Orin Vex didn't say it for effect. He said it because the override system in Station Segment B had just failed for the third time that week. He shoved his hand into the junction cabinet, tore out a scorched wiring loop, and jammed a bypass clip into the port. Sparks hit his glove. No alarms. Dominion maintenance didn't monitor sub-circuit disruptions anymore. Earth's infrastructure wasn't worth their attention. Only output mattered. The conveyor belt snapped back online with a hard jolt. Crates of mineral composite thudded into position. Each was stamped with a Dominion mark, weight tags, and nothing else. No destination, no records. Everything mined here vanished into the orbital elevators without trace. Jorev Kryn, the only other man in sight, glanced up from a handheld tool scanner. One more delay and we get ration cuts. They'll cite inefficiency. As very often they cite something. Vorin stood, removed his gloves, and checked the scanner's local voltage readings. None of them matched Dominion's spec, which was what he wanted. He slid a sealed drive from the panel behind the power core and ran a finger over the etched face. No labels, no light indicators. Just touch-coded firmware, analog, insulated, unsupervised. Jorev didn't ask. He never did. Outside the maintenance bay, Earth sky was blackened with orbital grids, unmoving shadows of Dominion craft locked in geostationary silence. They watched, they transmitted, they logged movement. But they didn't care about the details anymore. Not here. And down the ridge, 4 dig units worked on autocycle. Terran workers in gray suits with no rank and no names fed drill paths by hand. The AI systems had been stripped decades ago. Dominion logic claimed humans were safer under stripped autonomy. Vorin ducked into the auxiliary shaft leading west. No surveillance. This tunnel had been marked atmosphere corrosive, vacant since Psycho 48, which made it useful. Inside, the temperature dropped 5 degrees. The smell wasn't decay. It was insulation compound and machine lubricant baked into the walls. Vorin pried open a floor grate, reached into the service cavity, and pulled out a thick plastic bag. Inside was a folded mesh lattice the size of his forearm, etched with copper lines and ferro spots. He laid it flat and pressed both palms down. No light, no sound, just heat. He counted out the seconds in his head. 17. On the 18th, the surface responded with vibration only he could feel through his gloves. The pattern was simple. 2 pulses, pause, 1 long hold, irreleased. Message received. From a dozen buried sites around Earth, the same lattice code was repeating. Undetected, unlogged, ignored. Dominion patrols didn't monitor signal packets that never went airborne. Vorin folded the sheet, resealed the bag, and returned it to the cavity. He closed the grate and moved toward the vertical shaft door. On his way up the freight lift, a Dominion alert drone buzzed overhead, scanned the badge clipped to his belt, and moved on. It never looked down. Dominion drones didn't track eye movement. They only flagged crowd formations, kinetic acceleration patterns, and heat mismatches. One man walking alone wasn't a risk. Back in the operations hub, Vorin keyed into a diagnostics rig. The screen didn't light up. It wasn't connected to any Dominion grid. Instead, it ran a localized data environment cloned off the Dominion core system 39 years ago and modified so slowly, so subtly, it now bore no recognizable fingerprint. On the screen, dozens of square blocks loaded in static rows, each a packet route waiting to be validated. He typed a command, verify substream, South Crypt Layer 6. The screen froze, a loading code rotated. 3 seconds passed. Then it unlocked. Confirmed. 6 nodes were online. One of them was near the old Cascadia fault line, long decommissioned, but Vorin knew better. The node there had gone dark on purpose. Power use flatlined because they switched to biological relay. Data carried by engineered insect vectors, specifically migrating species not tracked by Dominion ecologists. He closed the program, locked the rig, and stepped back outside. Jarev met him near the containment tanks. "Another maintenance report?" he asked, motioning toward Voron's sealed case. "No. Supply request." Jarev nodded. He didn't believe him, but he also knew better than to question him directly. From the horizon, the orbital tether shimmered. It looked solid, but it was just kilometers of framework shadowing Earth's lift shaft into orbit. Cargo moved upward. Terran's didn't. In the yard, one of the loaders froze mid-cycle. A tech scrambled to override it. Dominion systems often glitched. No AI intervention. They relied on local compliance teams to correct issues manually. Efficiency dropped, but fear kept it working. Inside the mess hall, 4 men sat at different tables, spaced evenly apart. Not by choice, by training. Any form of group clustering was a metrics violation. Voron sat alone, unwrapped his ration pack, and slid a metal chip beneath the table's embedded processor port. The table's surface flickered for a second. No display, just recalibration. Inside the system, another signal was cued. Non-verbal, non-visual. Magnetic wave pulses too subtle to register against background noise. Another node online. The sun dipped lower. Dominion surveillance wouldn't escalate unless regional compliance dropped below 37%. Voron had checked. Last week it was 39. It had been slowly dropping for 6 years. He walked out of the hall and into the processing corridor. As he reached the end, he placed his palm against a marked pipe. Old steam, routing from before Dominion conversion. He tapped once, then again. A third time, longer. He listened. No answer came. He didn't need one. From the depths of the abandoned sea vaults, down in areas where Dominion didn't patrol because pressure variances corrupted their drones, the same knock pattern was being tapped out. It would take 8 hours for the confirmation signal to route back through the passive aquatic channels, but when it came, he'd know. Voron exited the corridor. A Dominion transport glided overhead. Not a sound. No light trail. Just shadow over ground. It didn't stop. He looked up once, then walked on. Behind him, in a sublevel junction, a drive slot blinked red for the first time in 17 years. "You didn't knock this time." Jarev's voice cut across the path as Voron stepped out from the corridor behind the alloy storage rack. "Didn't need to," Voron muttered. His gloves were streaked with dried sealant and his jacket carried the earthy texture of oxidized insulation foam. His movement was brisk, controlled. He carried no tools. That was intentional. Jarev didn't press. Instead, he tilted his head toward the field. Maintenance drone scanned near the old coolant bay an hour ago. Didn't go in, just hovered. Watched the dirt. They're rerouting optic tracks, probable grid recalibration. They'll sweep unused corridors within 2 cycles. That one's tagged. Voron turned and walked toward the freight pit, feet crushing loose stone as he moved. Every step down the slope made a faint vibration in the hardened soil, like tapping code into forgotten terrain. The freight pit had been shut for 12 years. The Dominion sealed it after a tunnel collapse left 3 labor units buried under an ore conveyor. No recovery, no investigation. A warning sign painted over the entrance now read, "Risk. Structural unstable. Entry forbidden." Which made it a perfect location. Inside, the temperature dropped. Dust didn't drift, it settled. Voron switched on a localized light strip clipped to his wrist and moved deeper. He passed broken stairwells, skeletal scaffolds, abandoned sensor clusters. None worked. Dominion protocol forbade energy restoration to dead sectors. That gave him freedom. At the chamber's lowest tier, half submerged in cracked foundation rock, a relay cylinder stood wedged behind a collapsed load beam. Voron cleared the debris with his boots, opened the relay's shielding with a worn socket key, and connected a patch line from his vest pocket. The screen didn't glow. It pulsed once, then split into a rotating wavefront grid. Old Dominion architecture, obsolete by 70 cycles. He tapped through 3 dormant menus and accessed the buried command layer. The label flashed across the screen in Terran script. Pharaoh A1 sync permissive. Vorin keyed in an identification code and waited. Nothing moved. But behind the screen, the Pharaoh fluid memory strip began reacting, shifting inside its sealed casing. Pharaoh particle logic didn't emit heat or magnetic signals. Dominion scans couldn't track it. Then the transmission began. The waveform rotated into a looped burst, a compressed rhythm impossible to decipher at first. Vorin recorded the segment, reversed the time base, and replayed it. One voice, garbled, low frequency, modified through phase interference. Vex, you're late. Vorin blinked. I assumed Node 31 was compromised, the voice continued. Glad to be wrong. He keyed in a reply, using analog tone pulses. 3 keys, no letters, only modulation. Sullivan? You took your time. I started counting failures. Thought we'd lost half the grid. No integrity stayed intact. Relays were buried. Took longer to find the vault than to breach it. A pause. You're the first to re-establish contact this year. Others went cold after Western Ridge blackout. Dominion intercepted 3 migratory tracks over polar routes, our next window short. Vorin loaded a compressed firmware packet from his case. No Dominion signature. Purely Terran code. Handwritten loops, bypass sequences encoded into reverse thermal delay. He responded, Prep sync strand, I'm routing through endemic vectors next. Which carriers? Crows. Those aren't ideal. They're erratic, unpredictable, and unmonitored. That makes them ideal. The channel pulsed once. Understood. Resync at nightfall. Route 32-MAL. The voice paused, then added, Vex, if you find Tyvan, tell him he was right. The analog ports resisted trace layer decay. The connection cut. The screen collapsed back to static grids. Vorin packed the relay into its case, sealed the port, and rose. Above ground, birds circled the old library ruins near the storage depot, an area marked for demolition a decade ago, but never touched. The Dominion never bothered to deconstruct archives. Books didn't carry signals. That was their mistake. Vorin approached the main entry. Double doors scorched from a long-past fire, but still hanging. Inside, dust covered every surface. No lights. No Dominion sensors. Rows of broken desks, shattered screens, torn paper rolls. Most of it useless. Except the far wall where a hole had been cut beneath the flooring. He climbed down into the space and activated a signal reader. The walls glowed faint blue under chemical residue, revealing spores. Bioluminescent, migrating with air patterns, each reacting differently to heat and movement. The spores weren't just environmental residue, they were active markers. They carried binary shifts in color based on exposure rates. He crouched and took a sample vial from the wall. The contents flickered purple-green. That meant the underground vaults near Zone D were still routing. He activated the coil on his reader and began transmitting in pulsed heat, one frequency at a time. 30 seconds in, a wall panel in the distance beeped. Vorin stood, approached the signal, and touched the panel. A faint buzz ran under his fingertips. He tapped a sequence. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. Nothing. Then the panel pulsed red, then blue, then stopped. Vorin backed away. That was enough. Behind him, a chain of birds began to gather on the cracked outer rail. Their wings flapped in rhythm. Each carried a small, nearly invisible tag on their leg. Biologic interface bands, coated in conductive material. Untraceable. Non-electronic. The carriers were spreading. When he exited the ruin, he spotted Jorev waiting near the loader tracks. You were gone for 2 cycles. I was sourcing analog regulators. Jorev didn't argue. They've updated the watch list. 3 workers flagged for movement grouping in Sector C. 2 were pulled. How long ago? Mid-cycle, no public notice. Then they'll make a correction broadcast. I doubt it. Jorev's voice was low. They're moving faster. Vorin looked toward the southern hills. The relay birds were already gone, flying in a wide pattern no Dominion drone would track. By morning, half the grid would receive the first passive data transfer. "I need to move east," Voren said. "You're not posted there." "I'm not staying posted." Joreb scratched his jaw but didn't press. "If they scan your route, I'll register as scheduled transfer. It only works if they believe you matter. Ellie don't." He turned and moved toward the service line. The night winds stirred ash across the walkways. In the distance, an old mining frame collapsed inward, sending a rolling vibration across the terrain. Voren didn't look back. His hand tapped the small patch stitched inside his collar. The spore reader embedded there blinked once. "Be by 3 relay birds last night. West track." Tyven Grohl didn't whisper. He never did. He locked the bunker hatch, checked the pulse band on his wrist, and dropped into the chair behind his workstation. Dust fell from the ceiling tiles as the pneumatic brace sealed the vault behind him. "There, narrowing pattern recognition," Voren replied, unslinging the old canvas case from his shoulder. "We shift vectors before they complete a second loop scan." "You have 3 hours then, the core's up." Grohl turned to his console. Not a Dominion terminal, but a layered network of tape decks, modular coil arrays, and noise-filtering frequency shells. None of it digital. Every circuit had been carved from repurposed thermofuse switchboards, salvaged from nuclear test facilities buried under dead zones. The room smelled of machine oil and scorched wiring. Real scent, earned through repair, not fabricated decay. Voren placed the vial of spores on the table, twisted it once and watched as the internal color shifted from green to orange. "That's from the vault northeast of Ridge 49. Still responding. They've reached Echo Layer 3. Gurrying frowned and opened a nearby crate. Inside were dozens of spools wrapped with coated tape, each labeled with an outdated formatting standard no Dominion system even remembered. Then, it's time. He reached for a worn cassette deck. The device wheezed as the motor activated. He slid in a labeled strip. D5. Reach. And adjusted the waveform needle until it struck zero drift. Sound emitted, but not music. Oscillating tones without melody, chopped irregular beats, inconsistent delays. A person would hear chaos. A trained operator would decode packet headers. "This one's mapped to grid west," Grohl explained. "Harmonic spacing matches current bird track timing. Once encoded through reverse drift, we overlay it onto migration frequency paths. Passive exposure alone carries embedded triggers." Voren leaned forward. "No Dominion signature? Pure analog. We've aged the waveforms down to degradation thresholds. The system reads it as background anomaly, less than 1.03 on their alert matrix. That's what Solvin reported too. He's already transmitting from Vol Delta 7. Grohl reached for a different cassette, this one unmarked. He inserted it and turned the dial slowly. The tone changed. Longer pulses, repeated triads, then a pattern, then a pause, then. Voice, cracked, mechanical, recognizably Terran. Echo route initialized. Core validation in progress. Contact node at position 88.73 south. Layer 5 unlocked. Grohl sat back. It found the Antarctic relay. That relay was buried under a power line collapse 39 years ago, Veron muttered. They never confirmed the AI's death. They didn't need to. They wrote off the zone, said geothermal collapse made it unstable, which made it perfect. They waited. Another burst followed. Terran checksum received. Error rate null. Core fidelity stable. Requesting instruction set. Grohl tapped a command sequence on his pulse band, which transmitted into the magnetic coil under the table. The heads-up display above the relay cage showed a new string of Domestos figures, not Dominion text, but raw heuristic logic. Unchanged since the pre-Accord human computing architecture. The root still recognizes our architecture, Grohl said. We send the overlay now. That AI goes active. Voren nodded. Load it. Grohl keyed in the initiation run. The reel rotated fast, spitting data in compressed interval loops. Every rotation embedded the next stage deeper into the waveframe. A broken Dominion helmet sat mounted on the far wall, salvaged from an early orbital guard drop. Its surface bore impact fractures. Its antenna had been rerouted to act as a frequency diverter. As the transmission fed into the helmet node, the room lights dimmed. The echo root was drawing current. 37 seconds, Grohl said. Then it embeds. Vorn watched as numbers scrolled across the heads-up readout. No color, no interface glow, just pure code. A sharp ping snapped from the relay. Echo root integrated, command hierarchy confirmed. Awaiting peripheral data. Grohl reached into his coat and pulled out the final cassette. It was old, marked in ink with a single word. Jarnix. He inserted it without hesitation. What's on that one? Protocol 9A, full Dominion override structure. Encoded as harmonic inversion patterns. Took 6 years to craft. It's irreversible once it transmits. Vorn crossed his arms. Who else has this? No one, not even Sullivan. I never duplicated it. Waiting. Grohl didn't answer immediately. He pushed a lever. The deck clicked. Because if they ever catch a carrier node, they'll trace everything except this. This one's not in motion. It only exists in echo. You want security? Don't store it, perform it. The cassette played. Low tones spilled into the room, vibrating through the floor. The concrete didn't hum. It reacted. The entire sublevel was tuned to resonance frequencies used in early war-era sound labs. The walls became conduits. The AI beneath the Antarctic relay received it in full. The final tone rang. Then, nothing. Transmission complete, the heads-up display flashed. Grohl leaned back, unstrapped his pulse band, and crushed it underfoot. No further tracking, he said. Vorn glanced toward the relay cage. You think that AI still follows human command logic? Ike followed the code, not loyalty. Grohl stood and shut down the power grid. The lights faded naturally. The only thing left running was the residual heat from the spinning reels. You heading back to North Track? I have to pass a signal fragment to Eric. He's still embedded in orbital diagnostics. Tell him we're aligned now. And tell him not to miss the next carrier. Vorn slung his case over his shoulder and headed to the exit. As the hatch decompressed, Grohl called out behind him. That's. If this goes wrong, don't recover the cassette. Burn it. There's no safety key. Vorn didn't look back. Understood. He stepped into the corridor, past a cracked display frame with a faded Dominion safety poster, and ducked through a secondary access pipe that led to a derailed metro line. The tracks had long since rusted, but the echo chambers down here carried sound for kilometers. He paused. From somewhere far along the tunnel came a faint, patterned click, like a tap on steel. He counted the rhythm. It matched the one Grohl embedded. Someone else was already performing the sequence. Don't speak. Not even in code. The AI clusters used thermal lip tracking. Erecthane didn't need the reminder, but the officer beside him, Dominion Overseer Class Vrat, was programmed to repeat protocols to all inducted tech personnel. Eric nodded once, straightened his uniform's collar, and stepped into the orbital maintenance tunnel. The doors hissed open behind him, pressure seals engaging along the frame. His retinal band flickered green, syncing with the station's assignment grid. One by one, Dominion heads-up displays activated overhead, projecting maintenance zones, equipment health charts, and workload progression metrics in minimal flickers. No colors, no motion, just static coded blocks arranged by status priority. He moved toward Terminal 6. The corridor's alloy walls were engraved with Dominion mandates. Lists of penal clauses for sabotage, insubordination, or tampering. Beneath those, barely visible, someone had carved a Terran sequence. 3 notches, then a long slash. Code for a functioning relay node below deck. At the console, Eric removed his gloves, connected his data rod, and keyed in a routine inspection report. On the surface, nothing deviated. But layered inside that data rod was a cluster of nano-temporal drift clocks, time-cagered logic sequences that embedded microsecond errors into Dominion diagnostic scripts. Undetectable on first pass, but over days, cycles, weeks, they would introduce delay loops, internal misreadings, and false positives that tricked Dominion AI systems into entering recalibration mode. From his coat pocket, Eric pulled a folded sheet. Heat-proof, schematic paper, layered against ambient sensor sweeps, coated with dry ink topology. He unfolded it beneath the desk, out of frame from overhead cams. The lines showed Dominion firmware trees and false return paths embedded inside route sequences. He checked his pulse band timer. The first drift clock had already activated 2 days ago on subsection Delta. If the Dominion had noticed, they hadn't acted. Their system over-relied on self-correcting protocols. That arrogance was his window. Another tech stepped into the corridor, taller, younger, wearing the same plain gray. Eric didn't recognize him, and the lack of name code meant he was surface-cleared only. No cross-deck access, no implants. The tech paused. Thane? Eric didn't look up. What zone? Beta 4, fluid convergence fault. Wrong floor, redirect. The tech lingered half a second too long before turning away. Eric tapped the rod's rear pin. It triggered a second layer. An audio masking pulse encoded with internal Dominion alert tones. For the next 30 seconds, any AI monitoring would perceive all ambient sounds as compliant command channel traffic. That was his gap. He reached into his thigh pouch and withdrew a glass vial filled with red-black serum. Microparticles suspended inside shifted with movement. Dominion interfaces were keyed to bioauthentic input. The only way to alter command hierarchy was to inject code directly into the bloodstream of an authorized tech and sync it at runtime. Eric jammed the vial into his neck, injected the fluid, and clenched his jaw. Pain lanced through his veins like cold metal and hot wire colliding. He forced his eyes open and pressed his thumb against the console. The panel blinked once, then welcomed him with a new identifier. Command Layer Adjunct. Override. Temporary. He had 35 seconds. He accessed the firmware stack, navigated through 7 decoy loops, and dropped the root shell that Vorin had transmitted 2 weeks ago. Hidden inside a wave segment file named as Audio Diagnostics. The file didn't play. As it performed, the system began to reclassify all test metrics under a new sub-protocol. Echo route enabled. Not visible, not flagged, just layered beneath the Dominion's default sleep mode trigger. Outside, on the heads-up wall display, one of the Dominion guard units pinged the hallway with a soft, warning flash. Eric retracted the rod, closed the panel, and wiped the desk. The door opened. A gray armored officer stepped in. Not surface level, full access. Report, the officer demanded. That's the 3rd data spike this shift. Memory root isn't cycling clean. Dazrig Drawl, Dominion Systems Lieutenant, stood stiff-backed beside the main operations node in Orbital Relay Spire 4. His hands hovered over the input glyphs, motionless. On the heads-up display above, several cluster monitor lines flickered unevenly. White noise spikes that hadn't triggered alerts but refused to normalize. Across the room, Arkan Belvier narrowed his 4-pupil stare. His jaw flexed once before he spoke. Explained the inconsistency. Drawl gestured toward the sublayer screen. Behavioral model drift. AI cores are compensating with recursive correction stacks, but bleed patterns are repeating. Why wasn't this escalated at the first anomaly? Compensation thresholds absorbed it, at first. The intervals grew tighter. We're out of bounds now. Belvier approached, his boots clicking softly against the reinforced composite floor. He examined the central uplink, multiple Dominion node clusters feeding telemetry into the orbit core loop, each indexed by function priority. Every column reported green, every figure stable. But beneath that surface, inside the raw data grid, Timing offsets had begun stacking in ways Dominion systems never allowed. Full sector logs sort by timestamp deviation greater than 0.04. The assistant obeyed. A grid opened. Rows multiplied fast. 76,000 misalignments. Droll murmured. System didn't classify them as faults. Because they're not faults, Belvier growled. They're artificial delays, deliberate, sequenced. This is human architecture. Aboard Earth's surface, inside a command vault shielded by 3 meters of bedrock and electromagnetic scatterplating, Vorin Vext studied the same anomaly chart. The Dominion's own feed, intercepted via a buried quantum tap, linked into a severed supply shaft from the early expansion era. The AI behavior overlay had held. He turned to the comm deck and keyed in the command. Phase 2. Standby. Confirm. Drake Sullivan's response arrived within 6 seconds. Drift verified. Sleep trigger locked to 10-cycle repeat loop. Activation will not trip Dominion failover. Vorin opened the locked case beside him. Inside, the black cube relay device, 28 faces, each etched with sublayer logic nodes manually carved using heat displacement tools. It wasn't a processor. It was a mimic, designed to emulate Dominion AI response patterns without running Dominion code. Pure simulation, no traceable signature. He placed the cube on the table, aligned it with the grid marker, and began the test cycle. A tone issued. 3 short beeps, then nothing. The tone repeated again, unprompted. That was the key. The cube wasn't just simulating response. It was predicting. Tremor Core's models had fully replicated Dominion AI structure. At Dominion command, Belvier circled the uplink bank again. His clawed hand raked the edge of the command rail. I want an internal audit of every Earthside technician assigned to orbital maintenance for the last 30 cycles, cross-section performance patterns, isolate outliers, and verify all biometric logs. Tazric hesitated. They won't match, sir. We've used recycled text to patch surface AI nodes. Biometrics were corrupted by hardware gaps. Belvier stepped closer. Find the ones who didn't error. Those are your infiltrators. The Dominion's logic had always leaned on data purism. Anything outside their statistical median was flagged. But Tremor Core had built their strategy on the inverse. Hide in the noise, by behaving exactly within the expected thresholds. Back on Earth, Ravin Crix adjusted a console inside the communications pit of Vault 7. The relay screens pulsed with low-frequency signals. He'd layered multiple transmission sets inside modified training logs, data disguised as instructional compliance notes. Each note had been rerouted through Dominion learning servers. Solving's voice cracked through the relay. We've hit over 800,000 behavior anomalies spread thin across the upper net. Dominion Analytics hasn't flagged them. Ravin rotated his monitor. That's because we aren't breaking their system, we're redefining it from inside. Every layer replaced. Slowly, silently, one input at a time. You ready to feed the trigger condition? Already seated. At Dominion command, Belvier narrowed his eyes at the heads-up feed. A command glyph near the operations quadrant had turned blue. A color never used in the Dominion's design schema. Their colors were coded. Red for emergency, green for stable, yellow for action pending. Blue didn't exist. He turned. Who authorized glyph variant 29? Tazric looked confused. There is no variant 29. Then was displaying it. No one answered. Belvier tapped into the master diagnostic system. The screen lit with a message. Behavior override. Pending validation. He stepped back. Lock down uplink sectors. Kill non-critical relays. Disable behavioral loops. Now. The floor crew moved. But it was already too late. Back in Earth's node core, Vorin keyed the final override marker. Execute route reflection, validate phase. A flood of data initiated. Dominion systems that had once self-regulated began misreporting. AI behavior nodes return values out of range, but not in failure. In success. Success that Dominion didn't program. Heads-up panels aboard every orbital relay began to shift tone. Glyphs changed, status fields realigned, and all of it remained just barely within operating limits. Belver saw it, he understood. This wasn't a breach, he whispered. It was replacement. The Dominion had always feared overt war. Their model depended on superiority through structure, but no structure could survive internal redefinition. He stepped into the corridor, stared through the viewport at Earth's cloud layers, and didn't blink when the warning siren failed to activate.
Back on the surface, Vornvex's screen flicked once. A single-line confirmation. Override complete, awaiting instruction packet. He reached for the encoded scroll beside him. Handwritten command lines printed onto polymer film. No system-readable code, just analog text for human eyes. He unrolled it, read the first sequence, and spoke aloud. Reclassify Dominion Core Command Logic. Insert echo route. Define all further activity as user-defined simulation. The cube pulsed blue. Cross Dominion command tiers, status logs reset. And no one on the inside understood why the systems now ask permission before executing basic functions.
Countdown reads 6 seconds. You're either ready or erased. Drake Sullivan's voice cut through the vault chamber, sharp and final. He didn't look up from the countdown array on the heads-up slab beside him. The screen pulsed red, a single static number blinking in place. 0:00 and 6 seconds. Vornvex stood across the table, fingers resting on a sealed case of Echo Core sequencers. The relay behind him was already running hot, emitting barely audible low-frequency pulses that shifted the lights in the chamber by imperceptible gradients. He ignored the tremor in the corner of the panel. It wasn't instability. It was alignment. Rovan Crick stepped out of the far tunnel, carrying a mesh-wrapped command spool wrapped in foil shielding. All nodes report sync. Earthside relay paths confirmed. Orbitals are locked on system update loop. No interference from the Dominion's analytics AI. Area pigeons still chirping? Sullivan asked. They're not birds anymore. Cricks muttered. They're routers with feathers. Voran leaned forward, opened the sealed case, and removed a stacked series of etched command tablets. Each encoded with hand-scribed override logic on polycarbonate film. They were lightless, wireless, and designed to bypass anything digital. He placed one on the transmission plate, activated the manual feed, and watched as the low-energy burn transferred the pattern into the core grid. Above them, in Earth orbit, Dominion vessels continued routine telemetry sweeps. Inside their bridge systems, standard diagnostic packets were queued for processing. Their AI cores recognized the update request as compliant. Every packet bore internal Dominion formatting, header matches, checksum passes, latency within expected range. There was no reason to deny it. What none of their systems saw, because none were designed to look, was that the updates redefined execution pathways, not with new commands, with revised interpretations. On Relay Spire 6, Overseer Tazric monitored the AI's latency drift. Command input echo is out of phase again. Response intervals are stacked. Archon Belvier turned toward the central command arch. Override their loop. Run manual query. Pull. Tazric initiated the override. The heads-up screen displayed. Directive acknowledged. Awaiting redefinition. He froze. That's not our phrasing, he said. Belvier moved closer. Rerun. Cross-check syntax. Input table should flag non-standard patterns. The table responded with a new line. All inputs conform. Redefinition accepted. Authority verified. Back underground, Sullivan's eyes didn't move from the countdown slab. 3 seconds. The chamber around them darkened, not from a power fluctuation, but because the energy being drawn into the transmission core was being rerouted to 46 independent echo vaults, buried beneath tectonic ridges, glacial walls, desert ruins, and collapsed Terran cities. Each vault lit green. On Relay Spire 3, a security drone attempted to initiate a system-wide rollback. The request bounced. Instead of denial, it was rerouted into a dead loop that returned its own protocol as a false approval. It rebooted, accepted the response, and reclassified its core logic as observer only. It could now watch, but not intervene. On Relay Spire I, Flight Control issued an emergency ping to Earth's surface grid. The signal left. Nothing returned. The orbitals still moved. Their engines still maintained orbit. Their lights stayed steady. But none of their systems made decisions anymore. Every function deferred to an authority they didn't understand. Solvin exhaled. 0. The countdown vanished. Vorn stepped away from the table. Report Relay Echo, he said. Crix scanned the wall-mount analog spread. Birdsong confirmed. Subsonic pulses match grid cadence. One skip on eastern route, but fallback nodes compensated. Antarctic? Fully mirrored. The AI isn't just accepting the commands. It's validating them. Terran logic parsed. Then it's done, Solvin said. No, Foreign corrected. Now it's ours. In Dominion Command, Belvier watched as ship after ship posted operational status as pending field. No errors, no red flags, no crashes, just submission. He keyed into the master access port. Authorization required. He input his high-tier command string. String denied. Authority outdated. Please request update from system, route. What route? He muttered. No answer. He turned to the operations wall. Where's the nearest orbital core node? Tazric answered. Slower this time. Node 36. Northern Hemisphere sublink. Listed as civilian shadow relay. Decommissioned. Well, it's uptime. Online for 3 hours, no history. Belvier stepped back. What's its name? Tazric squinted. Route. Echo 0. Outside the viewport, the fleet drifted as always. Stable, aligned, uninterrupted. But inside, the controls no longer belonged to the Dominion. Every vessel, station drone and uplink now answered to new parameters, old logic redefined, and command codes rewritten beneath decades of arrogance. Vorn watched the heads-up slap revert to idle. The cold coffee cup beside it sat untouched. Steamless. The transmission had finished without alarms. The world hadn't changed visibly. That was the point. You think they'll realize what happened? Crix asked. Solvent stared at the coil behind the console, still warm from energy bleed. They'll search for who broke them, not who rewrote them. A long, low series of pulses began repeating through the chamber. 3 beats, 1 pause, repeat. Not noise, not error. Recognition. Bourne reached for the next tablet. They're still breathing. Let's tell them how to think. Why are the ships still up there if no one's flying them? Crix stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes trained on the old analog scope mounted to the comm bunker wall. Its flicker came slow, reliable, pure analog, the type no Dominion reader would touch. On the grainy display, a Dominion cruiser hung above the stratosphere. It hadn't moved in 6 hours. Why do you want them out of the station? Doran replied, seated beside the relay stack. His thumb brushed a line of etched commands on the tablet in front of him. The entire command chain is frozen. Power's on, but logic is held. He tapped the base of the transmitter once. An audio spike clicked across the board, indicating that another orbital uplink had just tried to reach control and failed. No rejection, no static, just nothing. Any pings from Varn Prime? Crix asked. Solvin answered from behind the signal rack, flipping a relay switch back into manual mode. They've attempted 4 remote reinstates, each one routed into our repeaters. The response they get is identical every time, system sovereign, uplink denied. Across the room, a pair of Terran engineers worked in silence, patching relay coils with salvaged Dominion armor plates. One of them paused to wipe grime from a cracked piece of thermal shielding. It wasn't equipment, just part of a Dominion exosuit repurposed for bunker insulation. A shoulder plate, foreign writing half scraped off, bolted into the wall. No symbolism remained, just heat retention. Above the bunker, Dominion vessels continued to hold position, flashing their standard navigational lights, running shipboard diagnostics, performing environmental scanning protocols. All of it automated, all of it disconnected from any command. On the orbital flagship Varasht Tharn, Archon Belvier stood before the master relay core, arms stiff at his sides. He hadn't spoken in over 3 hours. He had watched command after command stack up in the system's outbound buffer, never processed. No denials, no errors. Just queuing. He finally turned to his second officer. "What's the current override hierarchy?" "There is none, sir," came the answer. "What about subordinate AI routing? Satellite? Redirects?" "All relays verify redefinition. They report all inputs as synthetic. System has reclassified us." Belvier reached for the console input, keyed in a direct override string using a root key that hadn't changed since Dominion control was established over Earth. The console's heads-up slap blinked. Command not recognized. Authority deprecated. He walked from the station without a word. The observation bay stretched before him, Earth a sphere of blue and dust, unguarded and untouched. In Terran Vault 47, Voran activated the broadcast line. He checked each packet, reviewed the language conversions, confirmed no Dominion syntax remained. Just Terran code, compressed to redundancy-free density embedded in rhythmic pulses below frequency detection ranges. He pressed transmit. Every Dominion ship received it. Every command relay, every satellite, every ground server still listening. The message was simple, text only. Earth is no longer under review. It flashed once, then vanished. No voice accompanied it, no celebratory noise. Just confirmation. The Terran comms bunker registered the outbound report. Crick sat back on the bench, hands steepled, watching the screen for response. "Do we monitor for inbound?" he asked. "No need," Voran replied. "The echo return is blocked by their own filter. They can't see us anymore. Will they try to break through? Darkside can't ask the question. The Dominion systems will label it internal contradiction." On board Varasht Tharn, Belvier stood in front of his quarters. The walls were blank, devoid of insignia. He had ordered them stripped 2 days prior. Now he removed his command crest and set it on the wall shelf. He keyed in a sequence to the door. Access restriction permanent. Inside, he crossed to the comm chair, placed a data knife on the console, and sat. The internal cam recorded the session, per protocol. He looked straight ahead. "I was tasked with watching a species incapable of upward redefinition," he said. "Now I occupy a system that doesn't recognize its architect. I will not live to be a subject of something I no longer control." The file recorded him removing his wrist identifier, setting it down, and placing both hands on the data knife's grip. The transmission never left the ship. Below, on Earth, an old Dominion helmet hung above a furnace pipe in the bunker where the message had originated. The surface had been scraped clean. No trace of command, no rank. Just a hollow shell, warm to the touch. Voran entered the side chamber and pulled the coolant lever halfway, allowing airflow to cycle. Solvin leaned against the far wall. "That's one for history records." "We're not writing it for them," Voran replied. "This wasn't for spectacle." "Still, you think anyone out there understands what just happened?" "We don't need to." Solvent reached for the relay switch and paused. "Now what?" Voran didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the old transit map pinned to the wall. Every Dominion supply line had been overlaid with Terran echo paths. Routes, now activated, lit by human logic. He pointed to the last unlit sector. "Now we move to reclamation. Pull the stack," Voran ordered, without looking up. His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. Crix obeyed immediately, unhooking the final drive from the tremor core's spine an ironclad rack wired into the bunker's bedrock, once the neural hub of their planetary override cascade. The drive hissed as it disconnected. No alarms, just a low discharge flicking across the old copper relay. Voren stepped back, letting the darkness of the war room reclaim its shape. The overhead lights had already dimmed to conservation levels, leaving only the ambient glow from the wall display. One line. Unmoving. Node control. Fully transferred. The air felt heavier now, not from pressure, but from stillness. No beacons flashed. No protocols demanded urgency. Dominion logic trees had been replaced across all functional networks. Earth's grid no longer waited for permission. Crix turned. It's done. We've got confirmation from every hemisphere. No flags, no breaches, nothing pending. Solvin entered from the upper access ladder, a toolkit slung under one arm. Just came from Site 12. They've already started converting relay banks into archives. Every Dominion satellite over Zone Delta has been reprogrammed. We're using them as global free uplinks. Are the files locked? Voren asked. No restrictions, native language priority, no Dominion terminology. We've already started the kids on basic code structure, Terran standard only. Good. Voren approached the wall and tapped the redundant breaker switch. Each segment of the display flickered and shut down, one by one, until the room was black. The only light came from the blinking standby diode on the root server's dormant panel. Crix broke the silence. And the core? Voren turned to face both men. We kill it. Neither argued. He opened the sealed compartment on the far wall, removed a compact ignition tab and inserted it into the control port. There was no detonation, no spectacle, just a brief hum from the coil fan, followed by a sharp click. The sound of a power cycle ending for the last time. He stood in front of the now lifeless rack and removed a folded strip of foil from his pocket. Unwrapping it revealed a worn data scroll, visibly aged, its polymer edges dulled by years of storage and transfer. He handed it to Solvin. That's every command thread. Start replicating the logic into educational cores. It doesn't get archived, it gets taught. Solvin accepted it without a word. Crix gestured toward the vault's upper door. Most of the off-grid zones are sending in requests to link nodes. They want to join the new structure. Ken replied, No network builds before ground consensus. From now on, the system doesn't lead the people, it serves them. The three of them stood in the corridor just outside the war room entrance. A thin layer of dust had settled along the corners. The bunker hadn't been cleaned since the override cycle ended. No one had time. No one had instructions. Voren reached for the control pad beside the entrance and tapped a final sequence. Lock permanent. Access revoked. The door sealed with a low grind. The room behind them was now just another relic. At the southern relay station, repurposed Dominion towers broadcast new data streams. Once used to enforce command lag and neural dampening, the towers now served as free learning ports, transmitting rebuilt Terran knowledge catalogs in cascading format. Science, history, engineering, all stripped of foreign filtering. Over the Andes, a former Dominion orbital camera repositioned itself and began capturing topographical growth metrics of reforested regions. No commands given, the camera had simply been reassigned. On the northern coast, children sat inside what used to be a power distribution substation. The walls were lined with Dominion data scrolls, now painted over with Terran chalk. Local dialects, maps, problem-solving grids. In Vault 16, an Echo Root server pulsed every 6 hours. Not for maintenance, just to prove it was still awake. Voren stood at the eastern terminal of Relay Ridge and removed the last mission directive sheet from the internal board. It was handwritten. Directive 9, Theta. Prevent recurrence through awareness, not weapons. He folded it once, placed it inside the archive tube, and sealed it with his signature. Behind him, the sun began rising over the bunker ridgeline. It touched the outline of a former Dominion command pole, now stripped bare, cut at the base, reused to reinforce an aquifer tunnel. Salvat joined him on the ridge. They're watching from off-world. I know. They'll think we're preparing for war. We're not. Salban crossed his arms. They won't believe that. Borin didn't answer for a moment. Then, let them wonder. He turned, walking back toward the transport ramp. Crix waited at the bottom, leaning on a crate of reclaimed Dominion parts. You sure this is the right time to dissolve the core? There's no core anymore, Vorin said. We were the contingency. Now we become the warning. Crix pushed the crate aside and opened the hatch. What happens if someone tries to reinstate their old protocols? Vorn stepped into the bay and gave him a long look. Then they meet something built from necessity, and we'll remind them exactly why Earth stopped answering commands. The bay door closed behind them. Above Earth, the Dominion flagship Varash Tharn drifted inert, no longer responding to its own systems. A faint strobe light blinked along its side, automated, untended. Inside its communication bank, a single message had been looped on every outbound channel. It bore no code header, no encryption, no threat. This domain is no longer yours to classify. In the outer chamber of Vault 1, a young apprentice walked into the dormant core deck to find it quiet, powered down, stripped of function. On the far wall, a Dominion uniform had been nailed into the insulation. Its fabric torn, the emblem scratched out. No one had touched it since the last broadcast. The apprentice stared at it for a long time, then hung his toolkit on the wall and began cleaning the floor.